Some would say you sell a second passport to the ultra wealthy. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Technically correct, but there's a lot more context. You can be the wealthiest individual and you can get accepted into the best schools. You can get job offers from amazing companies, but you're not going to get a visa. What are you going to do about that? We're one of the few industries that say, okay, what if you could migrate through investment? One of the things I would say separates very wealthy people is that they value their time a lot.
Krista, thanks so much for doing this. Some would say you sell a second passport to the ultra wealthy. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Some would say, because it is something that we are discouraged from saying, technically the industry that I operate in is called investment migration. And that is true that some programs advertise residency or citizenship-by-investment programs. However, that is a lot of words for one person to say. And so, yes, it's true that I would say colloquially, people say you sell passports. It's not as easy as that, but let's go with it. I will say technically correct, but there's a lot more context.
And so what exactly do you do? So you said that you do investment migration. How exactly does that work? How does one acquire a passport maybe in the process? And how did you get into it?
A lot of questions in one question. I will monologue for the next couple minutes, but yeah, sure. So basically the investment migration industry, broadly speaking, comprises of programs around the world that combine some kind of investment with a residency or a direct-to-citizenship program. Again, that's a lot of words, and a lot of people think that just can't be real, that there doesn't seem like this is legitimate. But I would say most countries in the world have some sort of investment migration program, about 20 of which are popular. For instance, I would say a lot of the European programs have golden visa programs. I think that is the marketing term. I have to say that golden visa doesn't exist in any law. That's just how the industry markets it. A lot of the programs in the Caribbean, Antigua, Dominica, have citizenship programs where the difference is you still have to make an investment, but instead of a resident card, you were then granted a passport. There are also programs in Southeast Asia. I think Thailand and Malaysia are among the most popular. So why do people do this? Why is it interesting? And why do governments even allow this sort of thing? Broadly speaking, investment migration is one way for governments to attract interest-free income into the country or interest-free capital into the country. Other ways of doing that usually require a lot more zigzags, political backdealing, but investment migration is just an open invitation for wealthy, let's say, families to come and invest in the country in exchange for something, right? It's always an economic exchange. So that's why countries would do that. Why would investors or why would families do this? One of the things we like to say is investment migration is only one of the few ways that you can change the accident of where you were born, right? You can be the wealthiest family, the wealthiest individual in XYZ country. We're not going to say which countries, but we can think of which countries those are. And you can be smart and you can get accepted into the best schools. You can get job offers from amazing companies, but you're not going to get a visa. What are you going to do about that? Investment migration is one way to basically, I would say, diversify the accident of where you were born, right? Your default passport. So for investors and families, we actually summarize it as SMILE, right? So maybe your motivation is security. Where you are is not a safe place and you need to get out of there very quickly. Mobility. Maybe you have a not so great passport where every time you want to leave the country, you have to apply for a visa. And sometimes there's that risk that you're not going to get it. The other one is just investment. So it's just a smart investment strategy in general to diversify out of one location. Lifestyle and education are the last two, and of course, employment, where similar to the others, what we find is that most of our clients in one way, shape, or form will have a combination of these 5 factors in different rank orders.
I guess my question on top of that is, it seems to me that it's an industry that's very difficult to understand. And there's a reason why there are businesses that purely specialize, such as Orience and what you do now, in making it easy for these foreign individuals to navigate this process. How did you get into it? How did you learn it? I imagine it's a difficult thing to learn.
It is a small industry. I will say that investment migration is very niche. It's funny because you can actually detach the two and you realize that there's many other companies much larger than ours that do this, right? So investment migration is investment and migration. So think about it as traditional companies that help do investment. That's anything from your banker, your private banker, PE firms, traders. These people handle investments. You're a real estate broker. These are investment professionals in some way, shape, or form. And then you have migration professionals, immigration firms, immigration lawyers. So when you think about that, it's okay, that's not actually that niche, but we're one of the few industries that put those two together that say, okay, what if you could migrate or immigrate through investment? It is difficult to understand because most people just don't think it's possible. How I personally got into it is I saw an article in 2013 saying that in light of the Eurozone crisis, many of the Sun European states, so Portugal, Spain, Greece, had established a golden visa where in exchange for interest-free capital flowing into the country by way of real estate at the time, they would then grant that investor and their family residency. And that just seemed extremely interesting. And I decided to go see for myself and see what that was about. And it's been, 12 years since that journey. And I can say that, it's a world of just many things, like investments, right? Like, I mean to say that at the time, I can say that a lot of people think investing in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, where you don't even operate in that currency is daunting. So a lot of the times what we do with our clients is having to give them the assurance that it is okay, that this is not a Nigerian prince situation. I'm sorry if I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but you know what I mean, that this is not a fly by night, give us your money and then we disappear situation, that thousands of clients have gone through this exact same process. But I understand it is usually a large sum of money. Most of these programs start at 6 figures as a minimum investment. And if you've never been to that country before, if you don't even speak the language, there's a lot of this trust barrier, right? And so you come to companies like Orience, like us, that one, tell you it's okay, that you are not the first person to do this. We hold your hand throughout the process. And I think that just makes a world of difference because you could try and piece it together yourself, but it's really difficult to navigate immigration forms when you can't even speak the language. Let's just put it at that.
Where do most of your clients come from?
That is an interesting question, and I would say it's program specific. So we actually work with several programs around the world, and you can imagine that the source country, or let's say the origin country of the investor and the destination program, there's usually natural, let's say, partners. I'll give you an example. So the Spanish Golden Visa program was a very popular program. I say was because it closed 3 weeks ago. And this was extremely popular for those from former Spanish colonies. So basically all of Latin America, including Brazil, actually, as well as the Philippines. Why this was attractive is because aside from getting residency in exchange for an investment in real estate, which most people will do anyway, like they're happy to buy something in Spain, but they get a resident card in the process. Those from these former colony countries also had a 2-year track to a Spanish passport. And suddenly, going back to your entry statement, you're like, can I buy a passport? And the answer is, you can't, but there's a way that you can, let's say, do it a little bit more sophisticated, shall I say. So Spain, for instance, as a program, had a very natural partnership with former colonies. There was a lot of demand coming from there. China, Russia, pretty much flocked to Portugal until Portugal closed to Russians for a while. China, by just sheer demand, is always going to be top of the list for most of these programs. And increasingly so, I think in context, United States. I would say that a lot of our demand in the earlier years really came from the East countries, so China, Russia, Latin America, even the Middle East. And pretty much in most recent months, it's just an overwhelming, and I say overwhelming, just floodgates have opened demand from North America, particularly the United States.
That's fascinating. I was going to ask a question about more around what it's like talking to rich people, and I will get to that. But I want to ask, why is the US blown up, and what specifically does Orience offer that they desire so much?
So the US, and I will say that prior to about 2020, we had no US demand, right? And when I say no US demand, is I can't even think of a single American client that we worked with prior to 2020. So 2020 was COVID. There was a little bit of a flashpoint in the political stage in the US. And for the first time in a long time, I think Americans realized that maybe the United States could potentially not be the best country in the world, quote unquote. Why? Europe closed its borders to tourists during COVID. And so Americans who were used to be able to travel visa-free predominantly to Europe couldn't come. And a lot of rich Americans didn't like that. And also just with rising healthcare costs and a very political space at that time, and obviously until now, it was just, again, increasingly so, a lot of Americans who were very happy where they were suddenly realized that there could be other options. So that, for us, 2020 was definitely that inflection point for US demand. Now, I have to say the US has a program. It's called the EB-5, right? It's not technically a golden visa, but for all intents and purposes, it's a golden visa. It's created as a job creation scheme versus a direct investment in real estate. And for the longest time, the US was a net inbound country. What that means is that we had a lot more demand for people wanting to go to the US than those looking to get out of the US. That has changed, right? There's still a lot of demand for those that want to go to the US, but increasingly so, a lot of those that need to get out of the US. And the starting point really was about 5 years ago, and it's just completely spiraled and skyrocketed since then. And you can probably guess why.
What sort of program, like, are these? So I want to go back to what Orience offers, because you mentioned they do the Spanish Golden Visa, or at least they used to until it closed. What else do you offer? And which specific programs do these wealthy Americans tend to go for?
That's a great and loaded question. And one of the things I like to say, and it's very true, is that there's no one best program in general. It really depends on your particular situation, how many family members you'd like to include. I'll give you an example. The Greek Golden Visa still has a $250,000 direct investment in real estate in qualifying, let's say, areas. And the Greek Golden Visa is one of the few programs that allows you to automatically bring your in-laws. So parents and parents-in-law are automatically just included. And I'm like, that is the best Christmas gift you can take to your in-laws and say, hey, here's a Greek residence card. But the Greek Golden Visa doesn't allow you to work there. So if it's something that you want to use to relocate, it doesn't really give you many options. Portugal is attractive for Americans because Portugal dangles the carrot that you can apply for citizenship after 5 years, which basically means that you don't have to live in Portugal to apply for a passport, which is what Spain technically makes you do for 10 years if you're American. So Portugal is very attractive for Americans. Italy has a golden visa at 250 where you can apply for the visa first, get a pre-approval, and invest later. So I don't want to drown you in the details. And by the way, Malta has the only citizenship program in Europe where it's a little bit over €1 million, but you basically get a passport provided you pass compliance in 18 months. So going back to what I said, depending on what you want, right? Do you want to relocate? Do you see this as a plan B? Do you want a residence card? Do you want a passport? Where do you actually want to live? I would say pretty much factors into the decision. I will say that Americans in general are lifestyle investors. So we say that Italy is a brand that resonates a lot with Americans as well as Spain. So also Americans don't seem to have a lot of the sticker shock that we have with other nationalities. Americans are more sophisticated investors. So they're used to, let's say, more sophisticated financial products. For instance, Portugal only allows investments in funds now instead of real estate. So a lot of people didn't like that. But again, Americans are sophisticated investors that are used to investing in funds anyway. So that's not really a deterrent. I also have to say that we're talking about investment migration products, right? So typically you need to invest in something in order to get residency. But there are also a class of residency visas that we call non-investment. So for instance, Spain has a fantastic digital nomad visa program, Portugal as well, where increasingly so, not increasingly so, the demand from the US has also been overwhelming. So in these cases, you don't actually have to make an investment, but you have to have some kind of a sponsoring company that allows you to relocate. And for those that are in a younger, let's say, age group or earlier on in their career, this is also a very attractive option.
I'm sure there are plenty of clients who've gone to you and they've said, let's say for the Spanish Golden Visa, let's say you're from the Philippines or one of these Latin American countries, former colony of Spain, and you get the government issued ID, you buy some property, and if you live there for 2 years, you can apply for a passport. What do you say when someone goes to you and he says, is there a way around that? Is there, it's that 2 years I have to live in Spain. Is there a way I can go for a little bit or maybe not go at all, but some way around it? What do you normally tell them? I'd love to hear more about that.
So I'm smiling because one of the things we always tell our clients is that maybe you don't want to try and game the system, right? So strictly for Spain, what is in the law is that you need to have 2 years of continuous residency. Now, what that has meant has changed over time. So effectively, the government body that confers nationality is the DGRN, and how they've interpreted this 2 years of continuous residency has changed over time. What we have to say is that Spain is also one of those substance over form countries where they've actually said that for them, it's not necessarily about the physical presence nor absence of the applicant, but rather their degree of affinity to Spain. I don't know what that means. I'm going to tell you that usually when a client asks me, how do I demonstrate my degree of affinity to Spain? I say, you probably need to be in Spain, right? So short of having descent, having family in the country already, the strongest affinity you have to being in this country is probably being physically here. So we usually advise our clients that, look, you can try and game the system. You can try to not be present. You can try and make frequent trips. We can always submit your application, right? I would say there's very little downside because you can apply as many times as you need to, and you don't lose your residency even if you get a rejection. But again, and I'm saying this again, maybe don't try and game the system. Because at the end of the day, Spain wants to grant nationality for those who really want to be Spanish and not those that are trying to just, as I said, game the system. Also, I will say that we've had more than a handful of clients that, similar to your example, have asked me, is there a backdoor? Is there a way I can minimize this? And I tell them the same thing. And 2-3 years later, I look at them, they're now submitting their application, and I ask them, how many times did you actually enter the country? And they're like, what do you mean, how many times? I haven't left. So they just fell in love with the country so much that they actually whatever plan they had in their mind before got completely thrown out the window because they just fell in love with the country and just decided never to leave.
I want to talk a bit about how you manage the clients, because I imagine you're interacting with ultra high net worth individuals from all over the world. Let's talk about the Americans, the Chinese, wealthy people, maybe from the Latin American countries. How do you entertain them? Because I imagine that your business is a very client oriented one. What are, any tips for young people who want to take care of clients? What do you do?
Boy. Honestly, it's a mixed bag, right? I want to say, and this is honestly absolutely the truth, that the vast majority of our clients are lovely people who are very understanding, who are very, I would say, appreciative of what we do. And one of the things that I personally love about what we do is we genuinely see a client and their family from start to finish, right? From that initial call where everybody seems a little bit nervous, they don't really know what they're doing, they don't know if we're legitimate, is this a scam, is this not, to when they finally have their resident card in hand and suddenly they're your best friends. It's just a really fun journey and very fulfilling one for a family. And to be part of that, I think for us is extremely fulfilling. Now, in the middle of the process, inevitably, many things can go wrong. Why? We can do everything to the best of our ability, but we're dealing with a lot of unknowns. The government administration can say whatever it wants, right? So, or let's say a family, when they're getting their application documents, things can happen at the origin country, and we can't really do anything about that. So we always anticipate bumps along the way. And I always tell my team that it's true that we can have very demanding and rude clients, and there is a way to professionally tell them where your boundaries are. That's true. That's few and far between, thank goodness. But for those that are demanding, you can sense that they're just nervous. And one of the things that we like to do is to put ourselves in their shoes and say, think about being this client. Think about being someone halfway across the world. You've just invested $500,000 or euros with this firm that maybe you've never even met before, but you don't understand half the thing. It is panic inducing and it is daunting. So with just a little bit of that empathy, understanding that thought process, that journey they're going through, you will understand that it's not against you. They don't hate you. They're just nervous about this whole process. And our job is to talk them off the ledge and tell them it's completely fine.
Krista, I want to talk a little bit more about the MBA you did at ESA, because I find that nowadays there's a lot of people who, and I'm on X a lot, and I always see this debate, particularly among the tech bro founders who say there's no value to an MBA. What can you learn that you can't learn working? You're attached to reality constantly if you're out there building something. And I want to hear about your experience. Do you believe that to be the case? And why is it that you pursued the MBA at ESA?
So I love that you brought that up because some of my really close friends from the MBA are now tech bros. So I just really think that there's many sides to the same coin. Me personally, it's been one of the best experiences of my life. I will say that I've enjoyed academics. I've enjoyed academic life. I enjoy the exercise of being in the academe. So for me, doing an MBA was enjoyable for the sake of learning things. Now, it's true that depending on what you're looking at, it might not be the best ROI. It might not bring you the best value from your investment. The way I see it is that I did my MBA for personal growth and to also expand my professional network and to basically be in a different country. And I said, if I can live in Spain for a couple of years and meet some cool people and learn a couple of things, that's enough for me. And so my reasons for doing it, I think, were very much aligned with, I was very clear with what I wanted. Now, do I have classmates who are a little bit disillusioned from the experience? Sure, because I think that there's a lot of people that have all of these expectations that say, if I do this MBA, I'm going to get a job at XYZ, or I'm going to be the next unicorn founder. Guess what? Not even an MBA can do any of that for you. So this is not I do this and I get that. It will definitely open a lot of doors, as with any program, as with any career, as with any, let's say, step ahead that you can get. You have to put in the work. And I think that if you look at the study of a lot of tech bros, startup founders, successful entrepreneurs, everybody can only tell you their experience. So of course they're going to think that's the way to get. They're like, oh, this is useless. But think about all the others that did it the other way. So I know that's a non-answer. It's just that for me personally, I didn't think about this as I'm going to put X to get X out of my career. I did it as a personal and professional development thing. At the end of the day, too, I think with any top MBA program, you're buying into a network, you're buying into the support group. And that for me has been invaluable. Every time I travel all around the world, there's always someone who went to my school there. And it's always this very open community that you have. So if all you want is to make a lot of money and be the next unicorn, maybe you don't need to do the MBA, right? If you want to make a lot of money, be the next unicorn, and maybe have a lot of friends along the way, maybe you can also do an MBA.
I asked that question because I feel like now, and you touched on it earlier, everyone's looking for advice. Everyone's looking for these prescriptions, let's call them, to success. And some of these tech pros argue that the MBA used to be a prescription that worked and now maybe doesn't work so well. But I want to ask more specifically about how you think young people should think about their career today. Because we're given so many different prescriptions, one of which is the standard. I'm in university in London, and the standard, okay, you're going to get an internship at a top consulting firm or top investment banking firm, maybe work as a trader or a quant. You do that for a couple of years, maybe you do an MBA, and then you get a more managerial position. And I find that nowadays there's so much changing that I find that maybe that path is valid for many, but there's so much uncertainty that I don't even think that one can bank on that. And I guess my question for you is, how do you think young people should think about their career in this ever-changing world?
I love that you phrase that question as if I'm someone who is a very seasoned senior professional. Like, how old do you think I am? And remember, I'm a millennial. So many would say that I have now lived through 3 recessions in my professional career. So I'm just on the same boat as you. When you find the answer, you tell me, because I don't necessarily have the same answers for you. But seriously, I think thinking about that question and thinking about my own career path, if you had asked me 10, 20 years ago where I thought I would be now, I would not have been even able to connect the dots, right? To say, oh, I would be a managing partner in a firm that does investment migration. I just feel like you've just put up a bunch of words together and I don't know what those mean. And it's true. I was also, I think, at that time in my career, or as I was graduating from university, thinking that the traditional model of you do this to get there, and then you do that to get there, and then you retire. Personally, I believe that model died like a couple of decades ago. Neither do I think that the gig economy of just having multiple gigs is particularly sustainable. Where the answer lies in uncertainty is always being open to opportunities and being flexible, that it is uncomfortable. And I think for me, it's multiple paths to success, multiple paths to failure, I would say. I think there's a little bit of luck involved always. In my opinion, where I've been very lucky and where I've been very fortunate is being in the right place at the right time and always being, in my opinion, kind to people. One of the things in my industry has been, we really don't like to antagonize anybody. And because you never know where that next sale or the next opportunity is going to come from. You never know that passing conversation you had over coffee. It's, oh man, that's a really good idea. And so maybe the only thing I can say is always be open to things changing. Like I would say the big blue chip companies of 30 years ago, many of them are gone. and being replaced increasingly with new companies. And these will eventually disappear, right? So somebody's going to start those companies. So yeah, I told you that's probably not an answer, but and when you find the answer, you tell me.
And on that note, and on advice for young people, you've interacted, and I've mentioned this several times with several questions with very successful people. And in meeting these people and when they share their story with you, what are some of the traits that you've realized or learned really separate them from other people?
Sure. And again, I want to emphasize that when you say wealthy individuals or families, I do think it's dangerous to completely put everyone in a basket and oversimplify and be like, everyone who is wealthy is like this. I will just say everyone who is wealthy that I like working with is like this, right? I find that many of these high net worth families and investors and individuals are genuinely curious. I think curiosity gets you very far, myself included. So one is stay curious about the world. I think when you have enjoyed a lot of success, particularly in business, it's also very easy to think you have all the answers. And so when someone brings up a new idea, it's very easy to say, oh, that won't work. And I do think that one of the markers of personally the clients that I've enjoyed working with is people who are curious, recognizing when the limits of your own knowledge have been reached and that maybe somebody else has the answer. And I say myself included, right? So I am an expert, quote unquote, in a very specific thing. But when it comes to things that are not that, I will find the person that has the answer. So I think that curiosity, I think resourcefulness, I think one of the things that I would say separates very wealthy people or families that we've worked with from others is that they value their time a lot. I mean, to say they're willing to pay a premium for someone else to take care of the problem. Versus I do think that there are others who will penny and dime you for certain things. And we're like, you know what? If you don't want this level of service, because like, but yeah, so I would say that curiosity, that resourcefulness in terms of understanding that your time is valuable. And you see it, right? You have a lot of these very wealthy people trying to extend their time on this earth, paying a lot of money to try and live, an extra 10 years? Because you realize that at the end of the day, no matter how rich or poor you are, all of us are limited by that time. So rich people are like, what can I do to make that time worth it? I don't want to spend all this time doing this dumb task over and over. I would rather pay someone else to do it. So, yeah.
You mentioned there are two things, curiosity and time. And among young people today, first of all, we waste a lot of time. Number one, I'm always on Instagram doom scrolling. I am as guilty as anybody. But on the curiosity front, and I think I'm someone who's pretty curious. I'm curious about your business. I find that a lot of young people are dulled by social media and all these things, and their curiosity dies. Or at least they get curious about things, in my opinion, that aren't very worthwhile. And I want to hear from your perspective. How does one cultivate genuine curiosity? Because I feel like it's something that, isn't talked about at all. A lot of advice that's given is be curious. But what if we're putting ourselves in positions where there's not that much to be curious about because all the inputs we get are dulling? And
Yeah.
maybe it's a difficult question, but how does one get that curiosity that you've mentioned so many of these wealthy individuals from wealthy families have?
Good question. I don't know if this is exactly the answer, and I'm guilty of the same, right? Sometimes it is just easy to doom scroll. One of the things that I like to do is I like to start my day without looking at my phone at all. I used to be traumatized because one of the first things I would do is reach for my phone and check my messages. And I realized that would instantly change my mood for the day. And I said, you know what? I'm just not going to look at my phone for the first 1 to 2 hours of my day. Stare at the sky, look outside, look at a tree. I don't know, do something else, read a book, journal, meditate, do something else aside from the digital, let's say, inundation of information we have. And actually, it's helped my mood immensely. So that's maybe one of the practical things that some people want to try. But one of the quotes, so I'm part of this entrepreneurs organization, and it's also Entrepreneurs Anonymous, basically, where we all share our stories from the field and just remind ourselves that we're not alone in this journey. The reason why I bring that up is one of my favorite, let's say, quotes that I heard pretty much in passing was that entrepreneurs or successful entrepreneurs are in love with the problem, not the solution. So going back to what you were saying about this curiosity is that I think a lot of really good businesses or just great ideas come from people who are, quote unquote, in love with the problem, right? Like not taking things for granted. making a problem fit a solution that they've already had in their mind. And I think that is where the difference is, that you are curious about the world's problems, whatever it is, you will definitely be ahead of many other people who are fixated on a solution.
And in your field, I'm sure you experience many problems on the day-to-day that can be very painful. And I want to clarify being in love with the problem, because I feel like there might be this misconception with some people, myself included, where being in love with the problem, they feel that being in love with a problem implies always feeling a sense of bliss while the problem's happening. And I imagine in your case, that couldn't be further from the truth. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
For me, being in love with a problem means looking for different ways to solve things, right? Looking at problems, or I always say the world's problems, just pick something, see how it's done now, and see if there's a better way of doing it. I think that's what I meant by being in love with the problem, not taking for granted what's already there. I think one of the things I remember is that if you research, and I don't have the answer right now, when wheels were put on suitcases, do you know the story? It is a lot later than you think. Mean to say, for the vast majority of time, suitcases that people lugged around had no wheels, because that's just how they looked. And suddenly someone said, this is ridiculous. Why don't we put wheels on the luggage? And now everything has wheels. So that is just one thing that someone decided, and it's so simple now, but someone realized that there is a better way of doing this for sure. And there you go. Now we have wheels in our suitcases because one person decided to be in love with that problem.
Most of our audience are young people, and millennials and Gen Z. So millennials maybe a bit less young.
Millennial.
But a lot of the things that previous generations always say, and I think they said this a lot about millennials, is that they're lazy, they're entitled, over and over again. And in fact, I think more than Gen Z. Gen Z, we got it a bit easier, but millennials over and over again. I remember I was maybe 13, watching some YouTube videos, and it was a lot of successful people saying, oh, these millennials, so entitled. Let me get your thoughts on that. I'd love to hear more.
Do you feel that in general, there is a trend where one generation always wants to blame the next generation for something, right? So also, everyone just forgot about Gen X entirely. So you have the boomers, the gray Gen X, and then there's the millennials. Again, speaking as a millennial, maybe this adds something that we are, I think, one of the few generations, I think the only generation that I think largely grew up in an analog world and then got introduced to technology in a very rapid way somewhere around our teens. And I think that if I were to comment about this, that the generations above us saw that and were jealous and said, oh, in your day, I had to do this. We will never have calculators in our pocket, like classic things we say. And I'm like, yeah, I have a calculator I have it on my watch now. So I think a lot of that comes from just this blooming of technology around the times that we were teenagers that just looked like laziness, I think, for those that were in the other generations. But we think the same of Gen Z now. To a certain extent, we're like, oh, the kids don't want to work. Like, everybody just wants to do this. And again, I think it's just always this generational thing that you will always want to blame or say that the generation after you had it easier for some way, shape, or form. Personally, I just think it's something that makes internet clickbait really exciting. I don't think there's much of a difference per se, because I think part of it too is as we go through stages of life, things that you want change, right? Your priorities change. So if I'm just a almost 40 millennial, when Gen Z turns almost 40, I imagine you'll be in the same spot I am now. So
There's the trend that's occurring in the world today is that millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, even younger than this, are not going to be accumulating as much wealth as boomers and Gen X. And a lot of people from Gen Z, and I imagine it somewhat similar for millennials, feel as though they've been wronged, feel as though house prices are so unaffordable. Even I was running the math the other day, and even if you have a great job, let's say in London, you get into, let's say, a great firm like Goldman Sachs as an investment banker. Even then, it's not even like it's easy to afford a house. You still have to really save your money and hope that house prices don't continue to rise dramatically. let me get your thoughts on that. Do you think that's unfair? How should young people navigate that? Because it feels like a lot of the prescriptions we've been given, even if we follow them, we don't have the same level of opportunity as older generations.
So I don't have the hard data to support this. I can give you some anecdotal kind of comments on things that I've heard and personally read over time. I've seen those, and I think there's some counter arguments to that. That I think it's true that I don't know if you've ever seen these articles saying millennials or Gen Z is destroying X industry. Put whatever you want there. I think millennials are not buying McMansions, yes, because we can't afford them. So things like that. And I think there is some truth to that. So the era of, let's say in the United States, Social Security for our generation just won't exist, for instance. And I think millennials are just so cognizant of that and having to look for our retirement somewhere else. And just understanding that maybe the state won't take care of us in our old age, for sure. And I think one of the anecdotal things I've seen is I also have the feeling that our generation, and even maybe generations after us, is generally less attached to material things. And I'll qualify that to say, of course, we still want a house. Of course, we still want all of these things that will make life worth living. But we're also one of the more mobile, let's say, and more internationally curious generations. Why do you think there's digital nomad visas everywhere? Because people want to travel. We want to experience the world and not necessarily acquire McMansions and cars. I think one, because we just think that's too expensive. And, we're like, what's the point? And secondly, but I just feel that it's a different mindset entirely. So that's one thing that I'm thinking, that renting subscription-based things are just more and more the trend for later generations. Now, is it because that's what the generation wants or that's what they can afford? I don't know. But that's definitely one thing that we're seeing. The other thing that I was reading too is that I think we're also a more financially savvy generation where we start doing the math and saying, if we have to buy these things on credit, we're never going to be able to afford them. So why would I buy them? I just think that, at least speaking for millennials, many of us have just accepted that we're probably not going to be wealthier than our parents' generation. And that's okay.
And would you say that's even the case in your network of very talented, like MBAs from ESA? Would you say that's the mindset in spite of people definitely having the skills to do these top careers, start these top firms? I'd love to hear about that specifically.
It's always a mixed bag. And I'm speaking, a lot of what I said in my earlier comment is largely a personal commentary. I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't feel that way. I just feel that at the end of the day, you can have these personal circumstances, and this is what's happening in the world at large, that maybe there's a little bit of acceptance in terms of what we can realistically achieve in our lifetime. I think usually when you do a top MBA like ESA, you have certain expectations. It's an expensive program, right? You're investing both time and money to be there, and you want to make it worthwhile. What I'm not saying is that people do MBAs to have a net loss in life. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I think when it comes to realistically expecting monetarily what you can derive from programs like this or future careers, I want to say that many of us or like many of my classmates, understand the economic circumstances or the environment that is currently at large. We often compare like, oh, if we had graduated X, Y, Z years ago, salaries would have been way up here. Or similarly, oh, maybe if we just graduated now, there would be more opportunities. It is so easy to do this exercise. But at the end of the day, it's like wherever you are, there you are. So it's like wherever you go, there you are. I can't change my current circumstances, so I have to do the best I can with what I've got. And I think that's the mindset that I personally have, that I can wallow and whine and complain and say, it was better 10 years ago. It will be better 5 years from now. What am I going to do in the meantime?
100%. And I think that's the advice if anyone takes, if a young person's listening and takes anything from this episode, I think that should be the advice they take. It's that
Please
there's a
don't
million
take any
different
advice from me.
circumstances.
First of all, if there's any advice you want, just don't take advice from me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you very much, Krista. I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. You shared some very interesting insights about buying a passport. No, just kidding. But really
Buying opportunities. How
buying
about that?
opportunities, buying
Yeah.
opportunities, and thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.